Hello, and welcome to How to Be Irish, a podcast by me, Una Harty. Fáilte Arash, if you're a returning listener, thanks a million for tuning in again. And to my new listeners, hello. This podcast is all about capturing the essence of what it is to be Irish in the context of today's world. Without further ado, let me introduce you to this week's guest, Amano. Amano Miura is an artist from Killarney, County Kerry. Her practice includes singing, songwriting, poetry, and performance. She is an artist by vocation rather than trade, as her academic background is in politics and world religions. Following a 7+ year absence from the music industry, Amano now works bilingually in English and Irish, exploring themes of changing identities, cultural fluidity, languages, and animist ecologies across a range of genres including folk, pop, sean-nós, electronic, and spoken word. Her latest release, Thread, a collaboration with Cork producer Calabanks, includes the single Heart, featuring Liam O'Muel Lee. You'll be delighted to know that Amano is also in the post-production phase of a new solo/indie music, which is set for release in early 2025. Amano, Céad to fáilte to the How to Be Irish studio. I want to start off by asking you mentioned about a 7+ year absence from the music industry. I'm curious to find out what has drawn you back towards it.
Such a huge question. I feel like it's the whole story of my life. I would have met you when I was 19 or 18 or 20 or something in Trinity running around. It's funny, some of my classmates from the time who I've met since said that they just distinctly remember me running or like never walking anywhere slowly, having a big like bundle of books at my front and my guitar on my back and just like racing from A to B. So I guess when I was a teenager and just up to the beginning of my 20s, music and performance were a really big part of my life. And I possibly was doing too much without any support and without any guidance, and things were just going from 0 to 90. And it was wonderful, but I definitely wasn't resourced within myself or within community. I didn't have really a sense of myself as a human apart from going on stage, people clapping, very good, or doing the essay, get an A, very good. I was really addicted to that feedback loop of I must perform, therefore I am good. And that just came crashing down, I think, probably in my second year of studies there at Trinity. And I left. I left college. I left music. I left everything. And I can't fully articulate why, but I feel like it was a blessing in many ways because I just wouldn't have been ready to navigate the dynamic and difficult terrain of the music and arts industry, where your job is to be vulnerable in front of people, right? I think if you're in any way under resourced, that's going to be a really difficult thing for you to sustain. Yeah, 7-8 years elapsed and different levels of similar crises unfurled during that time, but I really did pretty much blanketly stop playing music. I was thinking about it before we came on. It was quite fascinating to me. I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago did it start to dawn on me that, like, oh my God, I have a whole group of friends now who don't even know I sing. And it was quite sad. So I think little things like that, little realizations were calling me back. But then I would say in the last 18 months, I had a huge, almost personal rebirth, where I actually went through quite a similar pattern to when I was 19 or 20 of leaving school and leaving my job and like dropping everything, but this time to go back rather than to retreat. So I just dove straight in, and like that, it has gone from 0 to 90 really rapidly, but I'm really grateful for that. And looking ahead now, knowing that my job is going to be as an artist, and trying to imagine what that's going to look like without too much fear, because so far it's been working out okay.
For sure. You mentioned there your job as an artist is to be vulnerable. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I think that's a really, really nice way of putting it.
Yeah, I think no matter what medium you're working in, you are tapping into an aspect of human experience that not everyone is willing to touch. That's why people are drawn to go to see a movie or go to a gig or whatever, because maybe each of us can't quite go to a place that lives within all of our souls that an artist has been particularly called to explore. Yeah, that is a really vulnerable position, because artists end up being mirrors to the people who witness them, and that can elicit so many different reactions, deep emotional responses in other human beings, because you've been willing to go to the depths of your own emotions. It's of course not all art is deeply emotional, but I think even if what you're delving in is humor or the lighter sides of human experience, I don't really think you can truthfully access those if you haven't gone to the dark. So there's always an aspect of soul exposure, I think.
It's like displaying that empathy, but you've also perhaps experienced it as well. I had a guest on this podcast before, Dara Fleming, and I asked him, because he's a poet, and he suffered with depression, and he was telling me, I was asking him, do you need to suffer in order to produce like good art? And he was like, I want to say both yes and no in a sense, because he's like, you shouldn't have to, but also it does kind of help, and it does help you to, I suppose, to relate to people in those situations as well. In terms of your music, so you're a bilingual artist, and I've heard you in an interview say that Irish is almost like another instrument to you. I would love to hear more about what you mean by that.
I even struggle with the term bilingual artist, because it's not really a flex. Like anywhere you go in Europe or most parts of the world, the majority of people have 3 to 4 languages, easy peasy, English is, for all intents and purposes, my first language, and I had the privilege of going to a Gael school primary school. So I have okay Irish. I'm getting better. I would say I can express myself fluently at the level of like a young adult in Irish. I'm not quite caught up to 28, but I love it, and it's a different flavor of expression. It's a language that I think in comparison to English is much more earth oriented in its sensibility. Like so many of the phrases or modes of expression seem to be connected to aspects of the environment or a more magical understanding of life. But it's also a European language. Like I think sometimes we can over mystify Irish. For me, like I said in a previous interview, it's like having a different set of paints that I can paint with. I'm sad that I didn't keep up the other languages that I was studying earlier in my life, like Spanish and Italian. I think I am maybe more of a 5-year-old with those. And then Japanese, my father tongue, I am not even on the scale yet. But I hope to be someday, and I don't at times describe myself as a bilingual artist in an Irish context, but I would hope that I can expand that repertoire in the future. Of course, Irish and its story creates a whole other set of opportunities in today's day and age, but also it is a language of resistance for, I think, anybody who speaks it, because we have to remember its history on this island. It was one of attempted erasure, which also happened in many other countries in the world. And I think that in being part of an Irish language community or movement, we are in dialogue with many other minority and endangered languages in the world. Thankfully, we're not in that category anymore. But, we can't take it for granted either that we have all of the resources and opportunities and even just the safety to speak and create in this language now.
I can't believe that you said, my Irish is okay. Your Irish is absolutely fantastic. You've such a beautiful gloss to how you speak. Maybe in your training as a sean-nós singer, do you find that has helped you with your Irish and bringing the pronunciation to life?
That's a great question. Blas, it's such a beautiful word. Like literal translation is taste, but we use it to describe. It's not quite even an accent. It's such a difficult one, isn't it, to fully translate? But it's something that was always said to me as a child by adults, like whether it was teachers or other adults who I would interact with the Irish that I did have, they'd say you have a great blas, like blas Kyūshū. And I didn't fully appreciate that, I suppose, myself, because whatever, I was just speaking, and I didn't have Irish at home necessarily. So it must just be from being a good parrot that I managed to pick that up. And I think I saw it most when I sang. People would always give me that feedback when I sang as a child. I don't know actually if my more in-depth obsession now with sean-nós is helping. I think it's actually confusing it more than anything, because as a kid I had quite a limited number of Irish speakers that I was listening to in my schooling environment, and in sean-nós I'm listening to singers from all over the country who have completely different ways of speaking Irish and singing in Irish. And sometimes it's a natural reaction to try and mirror them to learn their style, but they're speaking in a completely different way to the Canúns here in Kerry, and it's definitely confusing the blast. Also, like most of my friends, I would say, who I speak to on a regular basis in Irish are East Coast Gaelgers, like around Dublin and Kildare. So they have a particular blast, and just as a musical person I tend to pick up on it. So I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm actually losing my losing my kind of strong Kerry blast. But no, it's something I want to work on, and something that I'm really curious about, because I've had conversations with different sean-nós singers in the past few months, particularly in the past 6 months since I got support from the Arts Council to sort of pursue my own development as a sean-nós singer. I've met with 5 masters, I suppose you'd say, around the country, and they all have quite a different perspective on that. Like, some of them think if you're singing a song from Connemara, you should sing it in the Connemara style, in the Connemara blast, even if you're from Kerry, because you lose something called madaracht, which is related to the vowel sounds rhyming in a particular way. It's quite scientific and amazing, and you wouldn't know about it unless you really looked at it. Whereas others that I've met have no problem with me translating their songs into the style of Kerry. But I think for me, if I'm going to go record a traditional album, for example, which would be an ambition of mine in the next year or so, I would probably focus on Kerry songs first, because I think you do need to establish that you can do that maybe before branching out. But I don't know either. Like, it's a really tough one. The purism element of any traditional art is murky water.
What do you think about that? Like, would you be somebody who would like to align to tradition and follow, okay, yeah, I'm singing a sean-nós song from Kerry, I'm going to sing it in a Kerry blas. What would be your take on that?
I don't think that it's very helpful to define any artistic endeavor in those sort of like clear-cut boxes. Like, even the word sean-nós is pretty new. Like, it's not a real thing. It's just a word that got used at some point to talk about most Irish songs. But like, if you really listen to a singer from Tír Conal Donegal and Kerry and Connemara, you'll probably realize that they're not necessarily singing in the same style. Like, these things have developed quite separately, and only now are really under the banner of sean-nós. So I don't really fully even know what sean-nós is. I can tell you what it's not, probably. But yeah, I don't see myself, apart from like thought experiments or practice, I don't see myself having to adhere to strict guidelines. And that's also a privilege that I can say that. I think not being from a Gaeltacht and being an outsider, it gives you a hell of a lot of imposter syndrome, but it also allows you to be a bit more creative without having to worry about any backlash or, disgruntled members of your community wondering what you're doing with their art form. Because like, I'm very happy to admit I'm not like, that's not my world in terms of a generational transmission, gloon to gloon, father to son or grandmother to granddaughter. That's not how I've received these songs. My teachers are CDs. Up until this year, my teachers were recordings and YouTube videos. And I am only now beginning to learn what it's like to learn a song from a human being sitting beside me. And it's amazing and exhilarating, but I can't turn back time and begin to experience that from the age of 3. So I'm not saying I'm a guest in the tradition because I'm Irish and I've had these sounds and songs around me all my life, but I am a student and I will be a student for my whole life.
Could you talk a little bit about what drew you to sean-nós to begin with, and what that journey looked like when you first started to learn through YouTube videos, CDs, and whatnot?
I find myself struggling to remember fully when I first realized that this was something I loved, but it definitely was in primary school. I'd imagine the first sean-nós song most of us hear is the Oria, the version of Ar Nathair, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember wanting to learn that ornamentation and how fascinated I was by how the melody moved, the texture of it. And I also had a teacher in 3rd class and 5th class who had this CD by Pádraig Niúlacháin. It's a collection of songs for children. Astoris Astorin or Mustoris Mustorin. I can never remember. I have a mental block around that. And I didn't actually remember that that's what the CD was until I made the link a few months ago and had like this epiphany moment. But he would put that CD on for all of our like Teacolla susses and like all of like every school play he would incorporate these songs in somehow, and it was the basis for most of our musical learning in those classes. And I remembered a lot of them for, I still remember a lot of them. They stuck with me. And then in secondary school, similarly enough, it was a teacher who really encouraged me. After I think he'd heard me sing in Irish or something, he gave me a CD of a lady named Lastarina Cainla from Inisheer, who I've had the pleasure of meeting now, actually, full circle, lovely, amazing moment for me. But yeah, her CD as well was something I started to eat up like when I was about 15. And then I started watching some of Irlo Leonard's live recordings on YouTube and learning those. And for my leaving cert, I would have sang Táimsim Chola, which is one of his songs. And yeah, that was kind of it. Like at that point, there was something solidified in me that on a selfish level, I knew no one could argue with, that like I was good at, and that made me feel more Irish, or like made me have more of a claim on my Irishness. No matter what I look like, that like I knew when I was singing these songs that there was something bigger than me, actually. Like I could feel this connection between me and the other people who've sang this song and the story that it came from and the land. And like there's just this huge wave of like home when I was singing. I could get lost. I could get totally lost in those songs and forget where I was and forget all of the sort of things that I was dealing with in my teenage years of, I don't know, not being Irish enough or not knowing who I was or blah, blah, blah. Because like once I was in the song, I was somewhere undeniable. But like that with all my music, I just kind of stopped. I mean, I kept up the interest. I would still listen to a lot of folk and Irish music, and I've always remained interested in Irish language. But the sean-nós interest really came back last year when I first attended the Aronaha on Club Iha in Club Corna na Gaeilge in Dublin. And I sang that song that I sang for my leaving cert. I hadn't sang in a very long time, but there I was 10 years later, and I gave it a go, and people were so incredibly encouraging. And like I had so many people coming up to me afterwards being like, how many more songs do you have in your repertoire, and where can we hear you sing, and blah blah blah. So it was like this huge moment of motivation that maybe I need to do something with this. And I went to a few more nights like that and started expanding my collection of songs that I know myself and sharing little bits on Instagram. And that's really taken me back into artistic life. So I have so much to thank sean-nós for, whatever sean-nós means. It's definitely changed my life.
It's a wonderful full circle moment, having been, as you said, te cola, like for your little suspiogs or whatever as a child, and having that music in the background playing, it would have embedded itself in you so strongly at the time you just didn't realize. And it's fantastic to hear that you're getting funding from the Arts Council to explore this interest and this talent that you have. And I'm really excited to hear how you incorporate it into your music now going forward, because you cover a lot of different genres. If you were to try and summarize your music yourself in a few words, and maybe a bit of an elevator pitch, if you will, Amano, how would you go about that?
That's so hard, Una.
I'm so sorry.
I am at a point where I'm unafraid of mixing genres in one set. I've no problem now standing on stage and opening with the sean-nós song and then turning on the electronic beats and churning out one of those tunes and then picking up my guitar and playing one of my folk pieces, because it's all me, like I'm the common thread between them. And I don't think I could be any other way, funnily enough, because I'm so unrooted in many respects. Yes, I'm from Kerry and I've grown up here, but I'm not from a big family. I've never had a huge stable group of friends. I've never been in one place long enough to really feel like I'm part of a community. And don't get me wrong, I want all of those things, but I think to have a cohesive artistic format, you also need to have sort of a cohesive nest which you've come from at some point. And I just don't. Like, I am in perpetual motion, and finally feeling like that's okay in my artistic output is really, really freeing. And I think it'll actually allow me to start to settle down in some ways. My solo work, I would say there are two main branches of it, and one is traditional song, and I'm not going to limit myself to sean-nós in that. Like, through my Arts Council funding, I'm also beginning to explore Japanese vocal music for the first time, and I'm sure that will start to inform me as well. And then my other branch is folk, alt, indie, that legacy of Irish bangers that I grew up with, from the Frames and Villagers and Lisa Hannigan and Lisa O'Neill, and yeah, those real poetic balladeers who draw from folk but who also have experimented in other genres relentlessly. I think that's where my initial interest in songwriting stems from, is that sort of canon of Irish artists. And that's the road that draws me as a solo artist most strongly. However, I love collaborating as well, and I have no limits really on the style of music in which I'm willing to collaborate with. And in the past year, that's been exhilarating, like working with more hip hop and electronic focused artists and friends, to see what my experience as a folk lyricist and a sean-nós singer can bring to their genres, because they don't always meet. And I think that's actually my role in life, whether I'm doing art or other things. I think the older I get, the more I can sort of look at my life experiences and the people who create this mad selection of individuals I call my friends. And that's where I am. That's what I am, is a person through which things that wouldn't meet otherwise tend to meet. And I'm glad to have that role.
Because you mentioned at the start that when you were in college, you were kind of viewed as this person who was like running through loads of stuff in your hand, loads of stuff to be doing. And now you're creating music which has so many different genres. It's kind of like you've almost figured out a way to make that chaos kind of work for you and enhance your art in a way, which is a really beautiful way to do it. Have you noticed any like similarities or differences, stark differences between like the sean-nós and the Japanese folk music?
Yeah, and I'm only starting. I have a mentor. Her name is Kaya Yamazaki, and she's based in the US, but she is a classical Japanese dancer, actually. And that's how I met her originally online, because I was just interested. I was starting to feel off balance the more rapidly I engaged with the Irish song tradition. I was feeling something within myself that was like, like yearning for some inroads to the other cultural heritage that I'm from. And I found Kaya and I started learning dance with her. But she's a a doctor of anthropology, and she's just so knowledgeable across everything to do with Japanese artistic history that I approached her about potentially beginning to learn song with me. And she was so up for it. And it's been really exciting beginning that journey with her. But I guess Japanese culture is unique in that it has recorded histories, music, etc., for like 1,000 years, and plus. So like what we're dealing with in Ireland, I mean, most of the written song material that we have is like 16th century max going back, whereas Japan is 8th century. It's a completely different immersion into historical art forms. And it's quite interesting as well, because I think in Irish tradition, whether it's song or dance, we tend to situate our view of ourselves around the fire, or in the Banatee's kitchen, or there's this real like a parochial folk element to it, which I adore, but which wasn't our only way of producing art. And we see that very clearly preserved in like the National Museum when you go and look at like High Christian Ireland, or like objects that came from castles and stuff like that, like before colonization really took its deepest roots. We can see like the level of, I hate this word, but sophisticated art forms that were here. But we obviously don't have that preserved, maybe outside of our harping music, in our song traditions. Or drama, for example, has been completely lost, which of course we had, and dance, etc. Whereas in Japan, I can like clearly see century by century who was setting the trends and what center of power was investing in art, and how that was then trickling down to the round the fireside village people folk music, because there's a dialogue there all the time. And for any sort of major artistic development, usually it does require some sort of investment from somewhere. It doesn't tend to drop out of the sky. So unfortunately, we have so many grey areas in fully understanding where our practices as Irish people have found have their what they have their roots in, who were the entrepreneurs of different styles, and etc etc etc. But it's fascinating to be able to play now with those two histories, and it makes me appreciate just how incredible it is in an Irish context that we have as much as we do, when we don't have thousands of years of an uninterrupted imperial family line preserving our craft. We've just done this because people kept singing and people kept sharing their stories, no matter what they faced. So yeah, it's a miracle actually that we have as much as we do in Ireland. And now that we're, I suppose, in the position of safety to dream new songs in those old styles.
That's certainly happening right now. Irish music scene has always been very vibrant and I think very creative. But I feel like there's more of an appreciation now for perhaps bringing in some old ways and styles and making it new. Exactly what like you're doing, you know what I mean? Like bringing in those elements of perhaps like sean-nós singing, and then not being afraid to throw that electronic beat on over it, like, and that excites people so much. Like they're kind of going, this is so new, I've never heard this before. It catches people's attention. Have you noticed that there is an appetite for old meets new when it comes to the Irish music scene?
Yeah, people are lapping it up. It's really exciting. And you know what I have to say as well is some of the nicest feedback I've gotten, especially about, say, taking such a classic song that most people know, like Costan Thugan, and putting it to a beat. It's like actually older people who've been like, I love that, that's so cool, I've never heard anything like that before. The people who I'd expect to be a bit like, Jays, what are you doing, have been the most excited. I don't know, like Ireland is full of cultural influences, and we're so lucky to be in our melting pot era for the first time in our history. I mean, up to the late 1990s, the number of people who were willingly choosing to come to work in Ireland were and in my lifetime, in the past 25 years or so, that's completely changed. And it's just, I think, natural that our music would begin to incorporate more of the world, as the world is part of us, you know. We are an island and we have an island identity, absolutely, but we're also so deeply connected. And like, I'm thinking about my own childhood. Sure, I was listening to Lisa Hannigan and the Frames, but like the other vast majority of the music I was listening to was hip hop, and continues to be. I think it's impossible not to be influenced by that. But it is a little bit scary to say, okay, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to see if these things can live together. But they even have a similar, history, I guess. The resilience of Irish language music and the absolute ingenuity of African American music and rap and hip hop are like deeply intertwined. Electronic music also is something that has often developed from the fringes, has developed in the subcultural parts of urban life. And people have been pursuing fusion in Irish traditional music for like the past 70 years. It's not new. I just think it's new because music has changed so quickly in the past 15 years in terms of being able to produce our own beats so well, being able to collaborate with more people from all over the world in the drop of a hat, being able to meet someone on TikTok and say, hey, I want to work with you, even though you live on the other side of the planet. Like, that is new. So of course, this is a moment of like rapid change in our music.
In 2020, you wrote a poem called Kerry, Let's Talk About Racism. I'm curious to hear about what inspired you to write that poem. It's a beautiful poem, by the way.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's had a few lifetimes now and a few edits, and there's a mostly Irish language version of it that exists in the world now. But yeah, 2020, gosh, I had moved home from New Zealand the year before to go back to university. So I was living in Cork up until the lockdown began, and then I moved home to Kerry. And then that was that extremely turbulent time as a human on the internet when George Floyd was murdered in the US, and massive conversations about racism began to unfurl, particularly, I think, in Europe and the US amongst the youth. Generally, for the first time, I think, really in my lifetime, was there like a mass discussion of racism being real. And in a way, I felt I lost something in that moment because I thought I was really special, you know? I thought I was this isolated individual down here in Kerry experiencing all of these things my whole life. And that somehow made me unique. But my God, did I get a wake up call when suddenly all over Instagram were Irish people of a similar age from different ethnic backgrounds open-heartedly talking about carbon copy experiences of my own. It was an amazing moment of realizing that I was just at the front lines of generational change in this country, and also, I guess, just wanting to reach the people who are closest to me, who aren't part of those conversations, who aren't 20 and 30 somethings engaging with that content, who are here in Kerry. I mean, I love Kerry with my whole heart, but it is hard to stir the pot here in any way and shake things up. Things are very much situated in traditions and expectations, and this is right and this is wrong, and these are acceptable conversations to have, and these are a bit too much, But I think I felt motivated to just try and create something in that moment that spoke from my heart to the people who I know as my community. And yeah, thankfully at the time I did get support from Radio Kerry to share that to a wider audience, and most of the feedback that I received was so beautiful. But there was at that moment in Kerry a lot of protests around dark provision centres and a real two-sided sort of denial around the fact that yes, there are problems. Yeah, this kind of like, oh, like we have too many foreigners, but also I'm not a racist kind of thing going on at once. I do think I have moved on quite a bit from discussions about racism and hardship generally, because possibly of that realization that it wasn't just me and that this is a symptom of a rapidly changing society, which I alluded to earlier. But of course, there's so much more work to be done. But I feel like I've reached a point in my own personal healing and development where I want to focus on the celebration and artistic output. I think I'm bored of talking about bad things that have happened. And I think if I can show up and be my biggest, most chaotic but artistic self, that will naturally show other kids who might have more of a mirrored experience with mine because of how they look or because of how their name is spelled or whatever, that they can do it too, and that like those things don't have to define them, and that we're moving in the right direction. We just have to keep going. We need to be loud.
Amano, do you feel like there's, to an extent, a kind of a box ticking exercise when it comes to diversity in the arts in Ireland?
Yes, at times. I think there's actually more of a box ticking culture around Irish language, which is really funny. I didn't expect that. And I only played my first full gig in Irish in March of this year of 2024. But it's amazing how often that seems to come up, where like an arts festival or something, they really need that one Irish language artist to fill out their bill. It's also amazing that there is so much work for Irish language. But I guess naturally I live in circles and cultures where we use English most of the time, and then we get to use Irish as well. And sometimes if I'm told it has to only be Irish outside of a Gaeltacht context, I'm almost a bit like confused. Like it just doesn't feel fully natural to put a little container around the artist and say you must use this language only here because that's why we're getting our funding. In terms of like diversity, yeah, it hasn't happened too much for me, thankfully. I think it probably does happen the odd time. I also do think that like companies and festivals and people generally are looking to work with artists who have different ethnic backgrounds because they're bringing different experiences and understandings of the Irish experience today. I would be reluctant to say that it's fully box ticking, because I think it is creating a more equitable arts landscape overall going forward. Yeah, I mean, box ticking is a thing generally, whether you start school or you fill out a form for funding. You're asked, what are you? Are you Caucasian or Asian or other or whatever it is? And like, it's one of those strange but very real elements of the bureaucracy in which we live. We have to submit to the boxes every now and then. But I think within myself, I can laugh at them because forms like that don't necessarily have any real meaning in the world. And I think as long as we remain cognizant that we don't have to box ourselves into anything, that we can somehow navigate the bureaucratic needs and the festival quotas and whatever else while retaining our own sense of self and truth and the vastness that all of us are, whether you can trace your ancestry back to North Kerry for 400 years or not. Like there's, we're vast and confusing people who are a big melting mix of different influences, and people have always moved and people have always traveled and journeyed and hit crises and gone crazy and done terrible things and done wonderful things, and we are never capable of really being simply defined. So whatever about those forms.
I find it interesting that you said that you found it was almost the Irish language that you felt it more in. I get what you're saying. I think for me, there was more opportunities available to me because I spoke Irish than if I did not. And that was a wonderful thing because there's so many things I got to do or be part of, people I got to meet because of Irish. So, I mean, I am grateful for that in a sense, but it also isn't great when you find that it's forced. You want Irish to be there because Irish is wanted there and Irish should be there, as opposed to they need to, again, fill a quota or whatever it might be. You were talking earlier about imposter syndrome when it comes to Irish. And I know that you have some workshops that you run called Nós Nua, and it's about overcoming imposter syndrome when it comes to the Irish language. Where did the idea for these appear, and how did they manifest then afterwards?
Nós Nua has been an amazing and unexpected journey. It was birthed sometime around October last year at a festival called Hidden Hearth that happens in Carlow. I met Kyūshū for the first time when I was there. He has quite a popular Instagram account called sean-nós, and he also was sharing some sean-nós videos on Instagram at the time, so we'd come across each other online, and our first conversation we shared the outpouring of emotion that people were having on our little Instagram videos, of I wish I could understand, and I wish I'd paid more attention in school, or I'd love to learn these songs but I could never be that good at the language, or this music makes me feel so much pain, or these sort of reactions to the old songs from strangers, and we were both experiencing that. And we also had really similar backgrounds with Irish in that neither of us come from Irish speaking households, but we both went to Gael schools, and we both had an interest in spiritual work, shamanic work and animism, and also that Irish seemed to be coming into our work whether we liked it or not. So we were like, all right, sure, look, we'll talk in the new year and see if there's anything that we can do with this. And we said, right, our shared interest here is sean-nós and song, and the place that people are reacting to us is in those songs. So how can we begin to invite people in so that they don't feel like this music isn't for them, that it's for someone else, that you have to be from a certain place or have a certain life experience just to access this music? It doesn't make sense. That's just not true. And yeah, it's been very sensitive work. It's my first experience of trending word, being a space holder. And it's great. It's big though. Like, you don't know what's going to come into the room. Like, we've had people, tell us about like corporal punishment in school, in relation to not being able to speak Irish well, or that, like, it depends on the age group of the people who join us, but there's really, really deep wounds that exist around the Irish language just in the last 2 generations, never mind the generation before that. Our grandparents had another level of societal pressure, I suppose, to move with the times and enter the domain of capitalism and progress, and saw most of their siblings emigrate and move to English speaking countries and lose their language for very practical reasons. And then, of course, going back further than that, you have like the introduction of state schooling, and there's so many different layers of trauma to the loss of Irish language that doesn't in any way only have to do with British colonialism on this land, but there's so much more than that. Allowing people, I guess, first and foremost, to talk about it and be heard in saying, I'm ashamed that I can't speak this. Or be heard in saying, my children are now in school and I can't help them with their homework and I'm embarrassed. Just these things that people don't have an opportunity to express that safely, and then move on to something joyful like learning a song together and using their voices and taking something tangible away from that moment of sharing. Also, I think realizing, wow, I have so much more in common with everyone else in this room than I thought, because everyone comes in thinking, oh my God, I don't speak enough Irish, I'm going to embarrass myself, like everyone here is going to be great and I'm not going to know anything. And in reality, like pretty much everyone who's ever come to our Nós Nua workshops is at the same place in their journey. Maybe some have better Irish than others, but they are still experiencing this sense of, who am I to speak this language, but who am I if I don't speak this language?
Yeah, there seems to be a huge amount of shame associated with the language, whether that be shame that they don't speak it, or shame to admit that, the embarrassment that they feel. What kind of age group then would you have at these workshops? Because based upon what you said they were bringing to the workshop, I kind of imagine perhaps an older age group.
Yeah, it's been a mixture. I'd say mostly people in their 30s and 40s are coming because they have kids and they're motivated to learn because of that. There's also a lot of people who are doing, more spiritual work, meditation work, stuff like that, who really want to connect to the land through being able to use some language in their work, in their own workshops, that kind of thing. And then there have every now and then been those surprising attendees who are in their 60s, 70s plus, actually, in Cork, and they bring a completely different perspective to the work, and it's been so valuable for everyone else in attendance. I think one of the more interesting experiences that I've had with people who've come to Nós Nua was a couple of older gentlemen who came specifically because we used the word post-colonial in our advertising, and they said they'd never been in a space around Irish language where that was given attention. They had both started to learn Irish later in life just because they were interested, but they found that a lot of the conversation was more focused on the surface level celebratory aspects, like the Céilí or this is Samhain, and beautiful, important things, but not really like going down into the dark of how we got to where we are with Irish. So it's nice to think that those words that are really coming into our popular vernacular recently are resonating with older generations, and giving them permission to walk into a space and say, hey, I have something to offer here and I want to learn. Nós Nua has been amazing, and I don't know if we've necessarily encouraged people to go off and start their own journey with singing and open up that door, which is what we were hoping to do. But we, I think, have definitely got people thinking about the role that Irish plays in their life. And the biggest feedback I think that we've gotten from almost everyone who's attended is a yearning for more casual Irish speaking opportunities, where people are on that same level of not trying to prove how good or bad or indifferent they are to the language, but just that they can give it a go and they can listen and be around it and talk about regular everyday life things. I think a lot of people are stuck in this loop where they feel like they have to go to a special event to speak Irish, which is not different to how, I guess, Crahor and I, when we went to school, we felt Irish just happens in school and we leave it at the school gate and we go home and it doesn't exist anymore. There are no adults around us who use this language. What context does it exist in outside of the school gates? So people are yearning for that in communities, I think, outside of urban and outside of Gaeltacht areas, just the regular towns of Ireland. People are really seeking opportunities to go for a walk in the park and speak Irish, or go to the pub, maybe outside of the classic pop-up Gaeltacht thing, with people who they know will be at their level, where they won't feel the shame or the I can't keep up, or the absolute fear of, oh God, I don't understand what anyone is saying. That said, I would say that in general, it's a really good thing to sit in a room of people speaking a language you don't understand. I think that's something Irish people don't do very often. And it's quite a normal experience for a lot of people around the world who live in more linguistically diverse societies. I think we're very slow to allow ourselves to step into a space and not understand, but try and feel in our bodies what's going on, or watch people more closely, or just catch the vibe. I think we're very good at creating vibes in Ireland, but I don't know how good we are at like catching other people's vibes beyond language. And it's a great exercise. A community in your area who speak a different language, or you're traveling, just actually sitting there and saying, I don't understand, and that's fine, is really good for us. So I would encourage people to do more of that as well, even if it feels scary and unnatural. It's something that I had to experience in the couple of times I went to Japan, and it is horrible, and you do feel like your skin is on fire for the first 10 minutes. But if you can ease into that and say, I am a human being and my communication does not start or end in language, it's really liberating.
I agree with you there. Like, I moved to Spain, so I had to learn Spanish, and I'm in that situation every day, to be honest with you, Amano. And I'm so used to it now that it just does not scare me anymore. But I totally understand that fear. And Irish people are known for having English and perhaps no other language, and it's that in itself is actually quite unusual, as you said a few times, especially like in Europe, because the countries are so small. They share so many languages. When you think about Swiss people, they probably speak on average about 3 or 4 languages, you know. But like in Ireland, people don't think about the fact that like that's normal to sit in a space where you don't know what's going on. And we do fear it quite a bit. And I think that probably then is translating into our old language, or at least maybe it came from our own language, and having that, again, that shame and that embarrassment around not knowing it, we are carrying it into other languages that we're trying to learn then as well. And another aspect of that is that if you aren't surrounding yourself in a language that you're trying to learn, then you're not going to pick up the pronunciation correctly. And it's like what we were saying earlier, like you have a wonderful bloss. You went to an Irish language school, you were surrounded by it, so you were able to pick it up. And some people who learn Irish maybe just through a book, they're never going to get that true bloss, and that's what really brings the language alive. Again, the word bloss you can't even translate into English really, and that's the beauty of throwing yourself into the deep end with the language, is getting that stuff that cannot be translated, for sure. Amano, what does it mean to be Irish?
Yeah, I did have a think about this one, Una. I think that to be Irish in 2024 means to have a responsibility to dream. There are many layers to that. I was first thinking about the tradition of the Ashling, which is the great Munster poetic tradition, which has found its way into many of the songs that we sing in what's now called sean-nós, where the poet dreams of a sovereign Ireland, you know, in the shape of a woman, or a grieving Ireland in the shape of a woman. But there was this great tradition of dreaming, really eloquently dreaming and imagining our futures, and not being afraid, I guess, to express that dream. And I think we're living in a moment where there are a lot of competing visions of what Ireland should or could or was or will be. And to dream collectively is something that is a key practice in many Indigenous cultures in the world, to preserve collective dreams and to pay attention to even the messages from actual dreams. But I think that that's our job actually as Irish people in 2024, is to seriously think about what we want our future to look like, because we're really the first generation who have the basic capital means with which to do that. We have, compared to most countries in the world, an extraordinary amount of freedom of speech and expression and belief. We have a society with really high access to education, and we don't need to worry about a lot of basic things that most people in the world do. We have massive struggles and issues, but ones that we don't need to have, because we have the means to do something different. So that's why I say that our responsibility is to collectively dream. And that, to me, that's what it means to be Irish, is to have the freedom to do that, to have a legacy of people who kept dreams alive so that we could be where we are today. But we need to catapult ourselves into the next phase of saying, how can Ireland be the equitable and beautiful place that we all know, I think, deeply it can be. I think regardless of whether you're coming from a perspective on the left or the right, there's always been this idea that Ireland has the capacity to fully stand on its own 2 feet and be a place that people can thrive in. And unfortunately, none of our governments since the foundation of the state have truly enshrined that dream for us. So I think we have to take back the reins and say, we know how to do this. This is our legacy. It's come up in some of my Irish language workshops as well. We've talked about, I think a participant said, this is the first time in our history where Irish is neither being beaten into us nor beaten out of us. And I think it's the same with just our general dream for us as a society and how we can get along. there's no one really strongly telling us what to do. There's just people who have the reins on the money that we need to do it. So for me, what it means to be Irish is to be a dreamer, but practically so. Whether you're an artist or an architect, there's a chance to create a vision that maybe doesn't even exist in the world yet. And I think we owe it to ourselves to do that. It's also hard to dream. This is a little bit controversial note to end in, but it's hard to dream without your head on. Like, we're one of the only island countries in the world that has a physical border across us. There's a sense of a disembodiment head to toe here that not many island nations in the world can even fathom. And I do think that is an impediment to the collective dream in moments. I visited South Armagh recently, and I was telling friends in Dublin and Kildare about it, and everyone thought it was like 4 hours away. It's an hour and a half. We have a certain lack of even bodily feeling about where we are because of our juridical situation. But I think it is incumbent upon us in this moment in our history to really begin to get to know the different perspectives that exist at the same time. There's no like fractured histories. Like we have one history here, even if they're competing. Like this one island contains multitudes. And if we can feel the fullness of what we are, the good and the bad, the things that we don't want to acknowledge and that we're not ready to, that we keep pushing under the rug, but that we need to look at, and the beautiful things that we keep celebrating and talking about ourselves as wonderful and exceptional, which we are in many ways, we need to take it all, incorporate it all, and say, right, I am ready to look at the future here of what Ireland can be, my trauma and my wins. Let's go. So yeah, that's what it means to me to be Irish, is to have this really unique opportunity to create something new in terms of Western democracies, whatever the heck that means anymore.
I'm trying to find a guest, in a sense, who can answer this question for me, because I always am reflecting on it. Ireland, in and around the time of the early 20th century, we had the 1916 Rising, we had the 1913 lockout. And I feel like our state in that moment was going to be founded on this idea of like a socialist republic. But we never followed through with that. And we are what it seems to be going further and further away from it at all times. I suppose I don't really even know what my question is, but I feel like it's like a missed opportunity or something. And I think the reason why I'm bringing that up in the context of what you said there is that I feel like taking that responsibility to dream can be fully activated by realizing the Ireland that we are and that we are going to be and that we should be, based upon like the birth of like Ireland in that time in the early 20th century. We're almost on a precipice of it constantly, but there are huge barriers that are still holding us back. And I don't know, I'm like, will we ever achieve that?
I think one of the biggest barriers is class, which we don't really like to talk about, but like the 1910s wouldn't have happened if extremely privileged members of the elite hadn't looked beyond how comfortable they were towards what other people in the community were being deprived of, to what other people on the island were being deprived of. Same in 1798. It was a similar thing where people who had everything that they needed to be comfortable and educated and free said, actually, hold on a minute, this isn't right because everyone around me is not experiencing this. Like in 1916, we don't just see a working class revolution, we see a mixed revolution of working class people being involved with people who are from a very different background towards a common goal. And I don't think it can happen otherwise, unfortunately. I think if the top 50%, or especially the top 15%, are just blissfully happy with their lot, which, you know, I wouldn't blame them for being, but if that just continues, if these vacuums continue to move away from each other, there's no way that we can move towards a collective dream. Because empathy was one of the first things you brought up in the conversation with an artist. I mean, if we can't break through comfort into greater empathy, we're kind of screwed, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how we get there. I think art is one channel that might help. But I also think the language in and of itself, I think, you know, the moment that I realized Irish was so important to me in my life as something that I would need to work with and carry forward was on a visit to Canada when I was very young, and I went to the Museum of Anthropology outside Vancouver, and there was an exhibition with no objects but just sounds and people speaking. And when I left the room, it so happened that all the people I'd been listening to were the last remaining elders who spoke those languages. They were the last native speakers on the earth who could still speak that language before they were completely eradicated. There were hundreds of languages on Turtle Island. I think even that in and of itself is like a marker of how lucky we are here to have the things that we have, to have the remnants and fragments of cultural traditions that we have vis-a-vis so many other countries that were colonized. I think even that in itself should be a motivating factor for us to say, okay, what can we do with this? It hasn't been easy. Like, I think there's a lot of people being drawn towards the far right now who are really in victimhood of like, oh, the Irish had it so hard, and oh, we were forced to emigrate, and oh, you know, yes, absolutely, it was bloody horrific here for a very long time. And for many people, it still is horrific here. But I think if we can get ourselves just a little bit out of that, acknowledge that people are suffering, actually put in place policies that help people who are suffering on this island. And then for the vast majority of people, look around and say, we're safe, we're free. What can we do with this? Yeah, there's a lot that we can achieve, I think, if we can get there. But yeah, I think acknowledging the real traumas, you know, that have occurred between the 1990s and now in the state, you know, by the state, is a huge part of that. Because just merrily moving along saying Ireland is so beautiful and wonderful and fantastic leaves a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth, because that hasn't been their truth.
It reminds me of when you mentioned about those older men that came to your Nós Nua workshop and were surprised to see the term post-colonial being used to work through the idea of the loss of the language and wanting to reclaim it and stuff like that. And you kind of, for us in our generation, that almost seems like an obvious kind of an angle to go with, because we've been using that for a while. But I don't know if you've ever read Fintan O'Toole's book, We Don't Know Ourselves. But I'm reading it at the moment. But there was one point he was talking about the 50-year anniversary of the 1916 Rising. And it wasn't viewed very positively, because as in the establishment that would have organised the celebration of it or the memorial of it, it almost looked like cheapened. It was like Americanized. They were trying to make Ireland look more appealing to the world in terms of like business. And they were trying to go, yeah, we're capitalists too, don't worry. Like, we're here, we've got money, education will be coming soon kind of thing. And all that kind of stuff. So they decided to like paint that kind of angle onto it. And so the general public were kind of like, what's this like? This is not really like a very good like representation of it. And the reason why I'm bringing this all up is because I feel like maybe in that time, and this is just from what I'm gathering from the book so far, is that I obviously wasn't there at that time, is that they never really talked about Ireland and its like recovery from the rule until quite a while afterwards, because they were too preoccupied with trying to get Ireland up to scratch with perhaps other Western economies and stuff. And so I think we're still in that process now of trying to connect back to that. And maybe that's why those two men found that term post-colonial so interesting, because perhaps they'd never thought about it in that context before, in a very deep sense. But for us, we have the privilege of being able to do that, and that's going to push us forward. And ultimately, like, as you said, if we can get everybody to look around for a second, the people who are in far more better positions to look at people who are more vulnerable and say, hold on a second, this needs to be good for everyone. You know, let's make Ireland as it should be. And then, of course, we can dream, as you say. Do you have anything else you want to add, Amano, before we close?
Gosh, yeah, you've opened up so many doors here, and I hope what I've said isn't vacuous or unrealistic. That there's so much real work happening on the ground every day, and I know the vast majority of that in terms of social justice work is unseen and at a community level. And yeah, I don't believe that we can all just like dream and that dream suddenly comes true. Like, there's very real work, there's very real need for system change and different forms of wealth distribution, etc. Maybe the important end note from what I did say there is that if you are listening and you do have a burning desire to create something or start to speak about something or get in touch with somebody who you don't even know is going to answer your email, but you really want to work with, like, do it, because that's where the dream starts. I didn't do that for 8 years of my life, and I was so sad, you know, on and off, and I've only begun to expand into maybe what my potential can be. And I guess that's where it begins, right? Is if those of us who are privileged enough to have the opportunity to use our gifts actually do, we can create so much more space for others to expand, and we can elevate circumstances for other people. We can open doors for other people. I think our grandparents and our parents maybe had to go along and mosey on in jobs that they didn't love, or they were stuck in a mindset of scarcity or survival. A lot of us don't have to be. I know for a fact that a lot of people who I love dearly and who I call friends are doing work that they don't necessarily have to do because they think they can't do anything more. But like, we can, like, a lot of us can recognize your privilege and do something with it, is what I would say.
Absolutely.
And that's where the dream starts for everyone else.
Wonderful note to end on. Amano, I'm really excited to listen to your music next year. When do you know when it'll be coming out? Do you have any other information for us?
Yeah, I should have a single out on like the 19th of February, I think.
Amazing.
Exclusive piece of information there for you, Una. In the mixing phase at the moment. Had an amazing time recording in Wicklow, and looking forward to sharing some of my own solo work for the first time in many years.
Brilliant. Right. Well, Gurv, míle mágat and Gnairi Lat, le Gachrod, and I'm sure we'll all be watching you closely. So appreciate you coming in today, Amano. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Una. Gur míle mágat.